Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Something really weird is happening in this world, and I wanted to actually talk to you about that. Recently, in fact, just about a day ago, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced NATO nuclear exercises that would be conducted. As if we don't have much to do in this world and much to worry about, that we have a nuclear threat that is going to hang over our heads. I want to talk to you about that, and I want to talk to you about the stupidity of this entire move and how this entire thing is basically without an off ramp. And I'm sorry, I'm probably a little stronger in my words when I say talk about the nuclear threat which is around the place. I've written about this, I've spoken about this, and this entire thing is basically something that we don't need. The Russia-Ukraine war chuggles on, and recently, as I said, there have been nuclear exercises that have been announced by NATO. All of us must actually think whether this is the right thing to do at this particular point of time. Is it the right move for NATO to make when, especially when they're accusing the Russians of actually throwing across a nuclear rhetoric? It's important for us to understand. Now, before I get into the subject, guys, please do hit the like button, check your subscriptions, and yes, of course, please do, if you can, contribute to the Dev Talks effort. There is a UPI number down there. You can join in as a member or just send a super chat or a super sticker as you please. Thank you so much for your support this while. Let me begin with the subject. As a matter of fact, before I actually hit into the NATO exercise bit, I'd like to actually mention one statement that was given by Jens Stoltenberg, who, as I said, is the Secretary General of NATO, some time ago, where he mentioned that a Russian victory in Ukraine would be a loss for NATO. And this is after NATO actually comes around and says that we are not involved in the war in Ukraine. How hypocritical can you be? Something that we'll have to see. So, as I said, NATO is basically announced a nuclear exercise which will be taking place in the next couple of days. The exercise is known as Steadfast Noon, and it is, in all honesty, it is a yearly exercise that was done even last year. It is conducted every year to check the battle readiness of the NATO forces, especially in the nuclear angle. What happens is that the NATO forces test their nuclear delivery systems in case of a nuclear war with Russia. They use their fighters, they use some sort of missile systems and stuff like that. Uh, they actually do also check a certain device for its readiness. Now, this device is not flown in any part of it, not now, has not it been ever, and I don't think it would be planned to be flown this time as well. Most of the aircraft that fly during these particular exercises are carrying dud bombs. So it's not a live exercise as per se, but the training is pretty strong in terms of its intent. Uh, this is what the charter is. Now, considering the times that we live in, we have to actually ask ourselves these questions. The big question that we need to ask is this the right time to conduct a nuclear based exercise when there is a ongoing hot conventional war taking place in Ukraine, especially when the Western countries actually accuse the Russians of pushing the nuclear button and keeping up the nuclear rhetoric, and actually, as a matter of fact, threatening Ukraine with tactical nuclear weapons. Again, something that we'll have to find out. 14 of the 30 NATO countries would be taking part in this particular drill. And remember one thing, NATO itself does not own any nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons are owned by basically United States, United Kingdom, and France. All three of these forces, as a matter of fact, France doesn't stay in this particular conglomerate. It tries to maintain a certain independence, as a matter of fact, with regards its nuclear weapons. So it's basically the US and the UK that contribute the weapons and the systems towards the nuclear deterrent that the NATO carries for itself. The main part of the maneuvers will be held up around about 1,000 kilometers away from Russia. Now, that is the only saving grace. But if you look at it, 1,000 kilometers in a battlefield which is as broad as Ukraine, uh, you know, kind of a little bit of a issue that I'm putting across. NATO has been, vehemently against Russia and this particular war, and as a matter of fact, has supported Ukraine out and out in terms of weapons, in terms of monetary support, in terms of logistical support. And now that we are coming to know, NATO has also been supporting the Ukrainians in terms of military hardware, and on top of military hardware, they're also supporting Ukraine in terms of planning and uh, intelligence. Something that there is a website called the grayzone.com which has come out, which has said that the British intelligence had come out and given a plan to the Ukrainian forces with regards to the destruction of the bridge in Crimea. Some of us might not even know about it, but the involvement of the planning part of this particular operation was, conducted by the SAS. Now, how this particular operation was planned in that particular report and actually how the operation was conducted are two different things, but the idea was probably given from there. So we do know how much of involvement that NATO has within this particular war. We know about the training which is happening in Germany, in UK, in EU, and many other places. One thing I'd like to ask, and Secretary General Stoltenberg actually mentioned this, that we need to ensure that NATO is ready to take on any particular nuclear threat that Russia would throw at it. Fair enough, that's a point taken. It's a hot war situation. You are at war with NATO, although everybody in NATO will deny that. But look at the scenario; they are at war with Russia. What I'm saying is, Russia or NATO is at war with Russia. So when they're testing this particular system in order to deter Russia for using a nuclear weapon, they are conducting their own exercises. It makes kind of sense. Why not conduct these exercises further away? Because Russia is not very comfortable with this, and this is something that they have mentioned. I'm sure uh, conducting these exercises somewhere around Germany or Poland is the current plan. This could have been done somewhere in Spain, somewhere in the western coast of UK, or wherever it may be, away from this entire thing, to ensure that the escalatory ladder does not get crossed. Now, a lot of you may say this is just an exercise. Why are you getting so hassled about it? Well, have we forgotten the 1983 Able Archer exercise, where a nuclear Armageddon situation was almost reached? Where, when the Americans started testing their nuclear command centers, command codes, the Russians did not understand whether this was actually an exercise or a preemptive attack by the Americans. It was actually a point of time when the world stopped and took a breath and reverted back from the brink of nuclear Armageddon. Those of you who don't know about this Able Archer exercise in 1983, please do find out. It's a hair raising experience. It's not something which needs to be taken up very, very carefully. Secondly, I'm not saying cancel, I'm not saying, don't do these exercises, but is the timing correct? A lot of you may again say this is just an exercise. Why are you getting so antsy about it? If it's just an exercise, the Minuteman missile that the US was supposed to test was cancelled twice before finally it was done. Why was it cancelled? It was cancelled because the US did not want to put across a certain narrative towards the Russians, or certain threat perception towards the Russians, that the Americans were planning a nuclear attack. So this is a very, very thin line of trust that each one of these countries who oppose each other actually fall onto. So if you're going to try and push across this line, it becomes a bit of a problem. And in Hindi, they call this faltu ka tamasha, and that is all I think there is to it. As a matter of fact, some interesting statements have come out about this nuclear rhetoric. President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has said, in case Russia does use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, France will not respond to it. Now, France is a member of NATO, but as I told you earlier, France likes to keep a certain independence in terms of its nuclear forces, and France has always been this maverick that has kind of worked away from the regular crowd. So it said that the French doctrine allows for weapons to be used only when there is a direct threat to France and not some other veiled threat which is further away from France. They would not be affected if there was a nuclear attack in Ukraine. And I quote him when he says this. It's interesting when something like this happens. Well, as a matter of fact, this whole nuclear rhetoric, let me rewind, came back out of President Putin's speech, which allegedly threatened the world with nuclear consequences, where he mentioned that the four regions that have undergone the referendum are now part of Mother Russia, and Russia shall use all weapons in its arsenal to ensure its protection. That is being called as a nuclear threat. Now, it can be looked at as a nuclear threat, but it's very important to understand Mother Russia has always been a concept that needed to be protected with nuclear weapons. What is so new about it? So, if the Russians are declaring those regions as Mother Russia, they are going to protect it. What we saw happening was a complete narrative shift and a complete narrative change that took place with regards to these nuclear weapons, and it was put across as a threat and so on and so forth. We also had a statement coming from President Zelensky, who called for a preemptive strike conducted by NATO on towards Russia, a nuclear strike, mind you. I think you could have, a short while after that particular statement, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg went on to the stage for a press conference, and he was asked about it. And he said, no, 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 there's nothing of the sort. They literally pulled back. When the Americans were asked about it, they also said, no, 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 there's no such plans there. We would never do something like that. So why is this nuclear rhetoric coming out? President Zelensky also mentioned that action was needed now, as this nuclear war is a risk for the whole planet. Now it's basically trying to externalize this particular issue when there isn't anything. The entire nuclear rhetoric revolves between the NATO countries and Russia. You don't find anybody else commenting about it. You don't find anybody else condemning or supporting this entire thing. It is a sort of a narrative warfare that is which is happening there, and the entire twist of the story is to ensure that there is a rhetoric which is created causing a certain threat. I mean, I was on another channel the other day where we were talking about this particular issue, and the interviewer asked me about this, about certain these iodide pills or something like that being issued in USA, and I've also heard these pills are being issued in Finland. The Finnish government actually encourages its citizens to buy a single dose. How far can you go carrying out this rhetoric? And remember one thing, we are talking about nuclear war. Apart from anything else, we're talking about surviving a nuclear war. That is an insanity of an idea as much as it is to attack a country with nuclear weapons. There is nothing that is going to be left. Who will survive? Both the major powers who have the maximum number of nuclear weapons have a doctrine of massive retaliation. So if there is a single weapon that is fired on the other, the next one goes. So when the next one goes, we know the result. It's Armageddon. Why are we even talking about this? My last point that I want to talk about in this nuclear aspect, and I'll also talk about certain other news that has come out, which is interesting for us to know within this entire theater, is that we are talking about a nuclear threat. Nuclear threats are normally given by countries when they are at a last resort. Nuclear weapons are always a last resort weapon. It's not something that you open your war with. I mean, no country is talking about that except a rogue country like probably Pakistan or North Korea. I don't think any of the other countries, even China for that matter, has ever spoken about an opening salvo of nuclear weapons. It's an insanity. We are talking about this as if it's something that is actually happening. The word nuclear was never used by President Putin. And that's the beauty of narrative. That's the beauty of a propaganda machine that has been put across in this entire war to create this particular narrative. Look at what's happening I won't say against, look at what's happening around India. Suddenly there's a narrative shift that India has kind of become a part of the plan of the Indo-Pacific, and Pakistan is gaining prominence. What prominence are we talking about? This is just a narrative which is being created in order to irritate us and nothing else. We must look at these entire things as a narrative war aspect and then react to them. This whole nuclear rhetoric, hearts of hearts, as a matter of fact, the people in the US have also said we have no evidence of President Putin trying to use these nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So where does this entire thing come from? It is just a built up thing. Some other things also happened. An oil leak was detected in a pipeline in Poland, which is the main route which takes the oil from Russia into Germany. Now, funnily speaking, the Germans lost their gas from the Nord Stream, and now they are just about to almost probably lost their pipeline. This pipeline is the Druzhba pipeline, and the operator is a Polish company called Pern. He says that he detected a leak around 45 kilometers from a Polish city called, I'm sorry, it's a little weird to pronounce, but Lok. They say that the cause of leak was not known. Now, this is, what it is the longest oil pipeline in the world, which carries gas from Russia. It gets into Belarus, it goes into Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, Australia, and Germany. So Germans have lost their gas and almost lost their oil. What's happening? Why is this attack against Germany? Isn't it? A lot of people say this attack might be against Russia and its ability to earn forex. But who's the end user of this oil who doesn't have it anymore? If anything actually of this sort happened, it's Germany. Germans really need to think about what's happening around them. There is just no aspect of this entire thing which favors the Germans. Now, what happened after the bridge attack? We saw massive retaliation in terms of missile and airstrikes that were done by the Russians. The Ukrainians today, when I look at their videos, they seem a bit wary. As a matter of fact, the American establishment, their responses were a little different than the confidence that we were able to see when the so-called counteroffensive was taking place. The counteroffensive, as a matter of fact, today that there are news where the Russian troops have advanced into the regions that were you know, taken up by the Ukrainians. There, the regions of there's a city called Liman in the east, and in the south, the areas of Kherson, where certain regions were captured back by the Ukrainians or taken back by the Ukrainians from the Russians, have started to fall back into Russian hands. So Russians have not done a lightning offensive sort of a thing, but they've crept back into the positions. They've straightened up their lines, and they've trying to actually move forward. So, what was that entire counteroffensive where Ukrainians themselves claim that they have lost around 20,000 soldiers? Was it of any worth? That's a big question that we need to ask. Now, another interesting thing happened is that right after these missile attacks, of course, these missiles flew by air. President Zelensky spoke to President Biden, and he said, we need air defenses and we need to cover a country very well, and it needs to be done on an urgency because President Putin has lost his mind. I'm just adding that up. I'm sure he didn't say that, but anyways, there is also another report that has come out, and I'd like to caution all of you that this report has come out from the Russian side. So use it with a pinch of salt. But this report particularly says that Ukraine pretty much lost about 70 to 80% of its air defense capability during these strikes. That's one of the reasons why there is a certain urgency in terms of getting air defense weapons from the air defense systems from the United States. Probably not. I'm not very sure about it, but it seems quite plausible when something like this happens. Uh, it is, interesting that we are talking about this entire thing when the Russians are now amassing troops. The reports are that the Russians have amassed troops on certain border regions in the north, close to the region of Kharkiv or Kharkov, as the Russians like to call it. There are certain reports that are talking about Russian troops back in Belarus. There are certain reports that Russia has been able to reinforce its garrison in Crimea as well. What is going to happen? I don't think is going to happen in the next some time, because currently the mud is one of the biggest factors that drives the entire operation in this aspect. The entire area is not feasible or not uh, suited for a heavy sort of a offensive that is going to take place. So, in my opinion, the Russians are going to bide their time. They're going to streamline their front lines. They're probably going to strengthen up the in certain areas and stuff like that, till the inevitable hardening of the ground, which would happen somewhere around 15th, 20th, or 30th of November, where we will see a huge sort of an offensive garnering force. How far will we be during that time? How far will Europe be able to handle this entire game? And how far will this nuclear bluff keep carrying on is something for us to find out. Thank you so much, guys. I had a short update, and I'll try and get you these little updates almost every day or every second day, so that it's a little easier for us to discuss larger topics. with my esteemed panelists when they come in here. My solos I can do with certain these things, and I'm sorry I've not been able to. For those of you who connected with me, I've not been able to give you ample time to join up with on this live stream. It was basically just about 3 to 4 minutes. I'll try and give you a little more heads up. Today was just something that I was trying out. But in any ways, there are certain comments that I'd like to go through. Rupesh says creating a fictional enemy. Why? Well, exercises are known to do that. That's how you kind of practice your weapon systems and stuff like that. But having said that, I get your point. At this point of time, it is not required. You know, it is just something which is uh, not happening and not conducive to the environment. मिस्टर भारत सेज क्या आपका कोई हिंदी चैनल भी है? वेल सर, अभी तो नहीं है, थोड़ा टाइम में बनाएंगे, कोई ऐसा वो नहीं है. आई नो, एक इंटरव्यू मैंने किया था हिंदी में, थोड़ा सा गिव मी सम टाइम, बिकॉज एक चैनल को मैं अगर थोड़ा सीधा करूं उसके बाद आई कैन गो फॉरवर्ड एंड दूसरा चैनल बना सकते हैं. रुपेश again asked, probably you know that US lost 3 nukes earlier, that they are still missing. US might bomb Ukraine with these three, blame the Kremlin for it. Well, it is, these are incidents that you're referring to are called broken arrows. uh, these things are talk of legends and talk of conspiracies. It's difficult to pinpoint anything on this particular aspect, but a nuclear false flag would be, I think, at the bottom end of the US list. Let me assure you, as irrational that we see the US government today in terms of taking their decisions and in terms of going across and handling this particular war, I don't think they are insane. And I don't think this particular thing would be on the top of their mind, because at the end of it, please understand, any nuclear attack will result in complete destruction of this world. So let's understand that very clearly. Tulsi Gabbard, in a statement after resigning, said Democrat is worth hearing. Yes, she mentioned that Democratic Party is warmongering, and she said many things, which is true. Her in a brave statement. Absolutely, Omji, there is no question about it. She gave a very very strong statement about the current situation in Ukraine and current situation with regards to the US policy in regard to this war. She called them warmongers, corrupt, and liars. As a matter of fact, uh, this is part of the domestic politics, probably happening just before the midterm elections. Of course, there's a lot more, as I just told you about the unrequired threats that are going around the place. But anyways, it's a big development. There's no question about it. Let's see how the midterms actually go through um, for the president of the United States. There was an interesting talking about the midterms. There's an interesting news that came out where the US is trying to pressure the Saudis to ensure that let them not cut the oil production just before the midterms. It should be done after the midterms. So the Biden administration kind of strengthens itself during the midterms, and after that the Saudis can do what they want to. So that's funny. On one hand, you're telling this, you teach the Saudis a certain lesson. On the other hand, you're walking around doing this. Well, this is just part of politics. So I just thought I'll let you know. Mr. Pugh said USA only plan is to engage Russia on war. USA is buying time to countering China. It looks like, well, as per the grand strategy, as what they call it in US, it is a game that US needs to play with both these great powers to ensure its whole hegemonic control over the world. These are the two powers that are threatening it, and let me assure you, if there's any other that comes across and becomes as strong as any of these, this same thing will happen to them. It's how great powers work. It's not something which is a good thing or a bad thing, but it's how the behavior of great powers is. And there's a whole writing, I'm sure. If you really do want to know about this, please do Google Great Power Competition, and you'll get a lot of data to read about. A lot of people have written about it on how great powers behave in times of threat. Um, Thank you, Mr. Nasinga, who says it was a great session. Thank you so much. You also say that November 3rd week, Europe will come into its knees. Well, I sincerely hope they don't, but it looks like what you're saying is going to happen, because currently there's only one pipeline that can supply gas into Europe, and that's the Nord Stream 2. One pipeline of the Nord Stream 2 is still operational. The Russians have said we are ready. It's just you just tell us, we'll switch on the taps and pay us in rubles, and let's be fine. Let's be warm this winter. But I guess it's going to take a little more time and effort on part of European powers to get themselves to actually start use. They know what needs to be done. Let me assure you this. The kind of protests that we see in Europe today is not something that is common. 3 to 4 days back, there was a protest in Paris when they said, "Let's get out of NATO." A couple of days back, there was a protest um, uh, in Germany, which spoke about the same thing. And just before the blowing up of this pipeline, the Germans were actually saying, "Switch on Nord Stream 2." A lot of people and a lot of analysts hint towards the fact that because the Germans were asking for this Nord Stream 2 to be switched on, this was blown up by all of us know who. That's all for me for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Uh, I'm sorry again not to give you a prior notice, but I'll try and do that to give you about an hour so that you can plan yourselves. Till then, do hit the like button, check your subscriptions. Those of us who are joining new, Dev Talks is all about talking about geopolitical matters, interesting fact based videos, and anything that I'm going to say, you can please go on to Google, check on it, verify it, and you will not be disappointed, because I am not here to create a narrative. I'm just here to tell you what's happening around, and a little bit of an opinion on what I think is the game. Thank you so much once again. My request to all of you, if you can, do contribute to the Dev Talks effort. There is a UPI number which is mentioned here. You can click the join button to become a member of Dev Talks. And of course, you can hit the thanks, which is just below there, to send us a super sticker or super chat. Please do also check out my website. It's a brand new website. It's called www.thedevtalks.com. Till next time, Jai Hind.